This is Erin from the Simply Novel team. Today, for First Chapter Friday, we're reading The False Prince by Jennifer Nielsen. So today, we'll start with reading the back cover and then the inside jacket. Here we go. A bold plot leads an orphan on a terrible journey to the brink of treason. Here's the inside jacket. 4 boys, 1 treacherous plan, an entire kingdom to fool. In a faraway land, civil war is brewing. To unify his kingdom's divided people, a nobleman named Connor devises a cunning plan to find an impersonator of the king's long-lost son and install him on the throne. 4 orphans are forced to compete for the role, including a defiant and clever boy named Sage. Sage knows that Connor's motives are more than questionable, yet his life balances on a sword's point. He must be chosen to play the prince, or he will certainly be killed. His rivals will be devising their own plots as well, so Sage must trust no one and keep his thoughts hidden. As Sage moves from a run-down orphanage to Connor's sumptuous palace, layer upon layer of deceit unfolds, until finally a truth is revealed that may very well prove more dangerous than all of the lies taken together. Jennifer A. Nielsen has woven a heart-racing tale full of danger and bold adventure, lies, and deadly truths that will keep readers on the edge of their seats. And this is book 1 of the series. All right, let's dive in. Here's chapter 1 of The False Prince. If I had to do it all over again, I would not have chosen this life. Then again, I'm not sure I ever had a choice. These were my thoughts as I raced away from the market with a stolen roast tucked under my arm. I never attempted roast thievery before, but I was already regretting it. It happens to be very difficult to hold a chunk of raw meat while running, more slippery than I'd anticipated. If the butcher didn't catch me with his cleaver first and literally cut off my future plans, I vowed to remember to get the meat wrapped next time, then steal it. He was only a few paces behind now, chasing me at a better speed than I'd have expected for a man of his girth. He yelled very loudly in his native language, one I didn't recognize. He was originally from one of the far western countries, undoubtedly a country where killing a meat thief was allowed. It was this sort of thought that encouraged me to run faster. I rounded a corner just as the cleaver suddenly cut into a wood post behind me. Even though he was aiming for me, I couldn't help but admire his throwing accuracy. If I hadn't turned when I did, the cleaver would have found its target. But I was only a block from Mrs. Terbeldy's orphanage for disadvantaged boys. I knew how to disappear there. And I might have made it, if not for the bald man sitting outside the tavern, who stretched out his foot in time to trip me. Luckily, I managed to keep hold of the roast, although it did no favors to my right shoulder as I fell on the hard dirt road. The butcher leaned over me and laughed. "'Bout time you got what's coming to you, you filthy beggar." As a point of fact, I hadn't begged for anything. It was beneath me. His laughter was quickly followed by a kick to my back that chased my breath away. I curled into a ball, prepared for a beating I wasn't sure I'd live to regret. The butcher landed a second kick and reared my back for a third, when another man shouted, "Stop!" The butcher turned around. "You stay out of this. He stole a roast." "An entire roast? Really? What is its cost?" 30 garlands. My well-trained ears heard the sound of coins in a bag. Then the man said, "I'll pay you 50 garlands if you turn that boy over to me now." 50? One moment. The butcher gave me a final kick in the side and then leaned low toward me. "If you ever come into my shop again, I'll cut you up and sell you as meat at the market. Got it?" The message was pretty straightforward. I nodded. The man paid the butcher, who stomped away. I wanted to look up at whoever had saved me from further beating, but I was hunched in the only position that didn't send me gasping into pain, and I was in no hurry to change that. The pity I felt for myself wasn't shared by the man with the coins. He grabbed my shirt and yanked me to my feet. Our eyes locked as he lifted me. His were dark brown and more tightly focused than I'd ever seen before. He smiled slightly as he studied me, his thin mouth barely visible behind a neatly trimmed brown beard. He looked to be somewhere in his 40s and dressed in the fine clothes of upper class, but based on the way he lifted me, he was much stronger than I expected of a nobleman. "I'll have a word with you, boy," he said, You'll walk with me to the orphanage, or I'll have you carried there." The entire right side of my body throbbed, but the left side was okay, so I favored it and started to walk. "Stand up straight," the man ordered. I ignored him. He was probably some rich country gentleman who wanted to purchase an indentured servant for his lands. Although I was eager to leave behind the tough streets of Karcher, servitude wasn't in my future plans, which meant I could walk as crookedly as I wanted. Besides, my right leg really did hurt. Mrs. Terbeldy's Orphanage for Disadvantaged Boys was the only place for orphan boys in the northern end of Carthia. 19 of us lived there, ranging in age from 3 to 15. I was almost 15, and any day now, Mrs. Terbeldy would send me away, but I didn't want to leave yet, and certainly not as this stranger's servant boy. Mrs. Terbeldy was waiting in her office when I walked in, with a man close behind me. She was too fat to credibly claim she starved along with the rest of us, but strong enough to beat anyone who complained about that fact. In recent months, she and I had settled into a routine of barely tolerating each other. Mrs. Terbeldy must have seen what happened outside, because she took her head and said, "A roast? What were you thinking?" "That we had a lot of hungry boys," I said. "You can't feed us a bean and bread every day and not have a revolt." "You'll give me the roast then," she said, holding out her plump hands. "Business first." I clutched the roast more tightly to myself and nodded at the man. "Who's he?" The man stepped forward. "My name is Bevan Connor. Tell me yours." I stared at him without answering, which earned me a whack on the back of the head from Mrs. Terbeldy's broom. "His name is Sage," she told Connor, "and as I told you before, you're better off with a rabid badger than this one." Connor raised an eyebrow and stared at me as if that amused him, which was annoying because I had no interest in providing him with any entertainment. So I tossed my hair out of my eyes and said, "She's right. So can I go now?" Connor frowned and then shook his head. The moment of amusement had passed. "What can you do, boy?" "If you bothered to ask my name, you might use it." He continued as if he hadn't heard me, also annoying. "What's your training?" "He don't have any," Mrs. Terbeldy said. "None a gentleman like yourself would need, anyhow." "What did your father do?" Connor asked me. "He was best as a musician, but still a terrible one," I said. "If he made a single coin from playing, my family never saw it." "He was probably a drunk." Mrs. Terbeldy rapped my ear with her knuckles. "So this one's made his way through theft and lies." "What sort of lies?" I wasn't sure if the question was directed to me or to Mrs. Terbeldy, but he was looking at Mrs. Terbeldy, so I let her speak. She took Connor by the arm and pulled him into a corner, which was an entirely useless gesture because not only was I standing right there and perfectly able to hear every word, but the story was also about me, so it was hardly a secret. Connor obliged her, though I noticed he faced himself toward me as she spoke. "First time the boy came in here, he had a shiny silver coin in his hand. Said he was a runaway, the son of a dead duke from somewhere in Aniva. Only he didn't want to be a duke, so if I took him in and gave him preferential care and a place to hide, he'd pay me with a coin a week. Kept it up for 2 weeks, all the time laughing it up, on extra servings at dinner and with extra blankets on his bed." Connor glanced at me, and I rolled my eyes. He'd be less impressed when she finished the story. "Then one night, he took with a fever, got all delirious, late in the night, hitting at everyone and yelling and such. I was there when he confessed it all. He's no son of anyone important. The coins belonged to a duke, all right, but he'd stolen them to trick me into caring for him. I dumped his body into the cellar to get better or not. I didn't care. Next time I checked on him, he'd gotten over the fever on his own and was a good deal more humble." Connor looked at me again. "He doesn't look so humble now." "I got over that too," I said. "So why'd you let him stay?" Connor asked Mrs. Terbeldy. Mrs. Terbeldy hesitated. She didn't want to tell him it was because I picked up goodies for her now and then, ribbon for her hats, or chocolates from the cake shop. Because of that, Mrs. Terbeldy didn't hate me as nearly as much as she pretended to. Or maybe she did. I stole from her, too. Connor walked back to me. "A thief and a liar, eh? Can you manage a sword?" "Sure, if my opponent doesn't have one." He grinned. "Do you farm?" "No." I took that as an insult. "Hunt?" "No." "Can you read?" I stared up at him through the parts of my hair. What are you wanting from me, Connor? You'll address me as Sir or Master Connor. What are you wanting me for, Sir Master Connor? That's a conversation for another time. Gather your things. I'll wait for you here. I shook my head. Sorry, but when I leave the comfort of Mrs. Trebeldy's fine establishment, I go on my own. You're going with him, Mrs. Trebeldy said. You've been bought and paid for by Master Connor, and I can't wait to be rid of you. You'll earn your freedom by doing whatever I ask you and doing it well, Connor asked, or serve me poorly and serve me for life. I wouldn't serve anyone for an hour until freedom, I said. Connor took a step toward me, hands out. I threw the roast I'd been holding at him and he flinched to avoid it. Using that moment, I pushed past Mr. Trebeldy and darted into the street. It would have been helpful to know that he'd left a couple of vigils at the door. One grabbed my arms, while the other one clubbed me over the head from behind. I barely had time to curse their mothers' graves before I'd crumpled to the ground. Okay, that is chapter 1 of The False Prince. Teachers, check out the links below.